Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're talking about a culture that became a superpower on the Silk Road, but not with armies or swords. Their weapon? The written word. We're diving into the incredible story of the Uyghur translation revolution. So let's kick things off with a pretty huge question. How do big ideas, I'm talking about entire religions, philosophies, even just great stories, how do they actually cross borders? How do they jump from one language to another? It's something we barely think about today, but for most of human history, this was a massive, massive challenge. Well, the answer, of course, is translation. It's this incredibly complex art, and for hundreds of years, right there in the middle of the Silk Road, there was one culture that didn't just do translation, they absolutely mastered it. And in doing so, they literally changed the world around them. So to really get their story, we gotta rewind way back. Think about it. As ancient groups of people started moving around, trading, sometimes fighting, they had this basic, fundamental need to talk to each other. And that's where the interpreter comes in. This act of translation is really as old as we are. Okay, so before we jump right into the Uyghurs, we actually need to talk about their ancestors, people like the Huns and the Gökturks. These were early Turkic groups who were always, and I mean always, on the move. They were bumping up against other empires, and all that interaction meant they desperately needed people who could build linguistic bridges. And check this out. This is like a little piece of linguistic detective work. The word for translator in Old Chinese, di, probably comes from the Old Turkic word didi, which just means he said. Isn't that cool? You can practically hear the ancient interpreters saying, okay, he said this, and then he said that. It's this tiny clue that tells us these Turkic peoples were the go-betweens of their world. But here's where things get a little messy. When we look at the historical records for these early groups, it's complicated. The Chinese sources from that time, when the Gökturks were around, are super confusing. They even contradict each other. For example, you have one major text from 632 AD that says this, flat out. And this slide just lays out the puzzle perfectly. Just a few decades later, another official history says the complete opposite. So you've got one source saying, nope, no writing, and another saying, oh yeah, they have their own writing, and it's kind of like the Sogdians. The Sogdians, by the way, were these major traders in Central Asia. So what does this tell us? It tells us that even for people living back then, the whole question of literacy for these nomadic groups was super complex and probably changing really, really fast. All right, so let's get to our main event, the Uyghur translation revolution, from nomads to scholars. Because the Uyghurs, they made this huge societal change that took this whole murky question of literacy and just ignited it. It turned into an absolute explosion of scholarship, a genuine revolution in translation. So you're probably asking, how did this even happen? Well, it was kind of like a four-step process. First, and this is key, they stopped being nomads. The Uyghurs settled down and started building actual cities. Then, those cities, they flourished into these amazing cultural hubs. Step 3, all of a sudden you have widespread literacy. And finally, once you have a whole society that can read, they get hungry for new ideas. And the only way to feed that hunger was to go out and translate all the great works of the world. And wow, were they in the perfect spot to do this? Just look at this list of languages they knew and translated. We're not just talking about being bilingual. These people were true polyglots. They were fluent in the languages of religion, philosophy, trade, the whole shebang. They could read Sanskrit from India, Chinese from the East, Sogdian from right there in Central Asia. It's incredible. And get this, it wasn't just about speaking the languages. They were masters of all these different alphabets too. They used the old Gökturk script, but then they took the Sogdian script and adapted it to create their very own super efficient Uyghur alphabet. Plus, they knew the writing systems of all their neighbors. I mean, this was a culture that truly lived and breathed the written word in every single form. Okay, so what was the engine behind all this? What was so important that it justified this massive effort? The main answer is faith. See, the Uyghur cities weren't just melting pots for languages, they were melting pots for religions too. And this chart really spells it out. They were translating sacred texts from 4 major world religions. You had Manichaeanism, which is this cool blend of Zoroastrian and Christian ideas. You had Nestorian Christianity, an Eastern form of the church, and later on, Islam. But as you can clearly see from this chart, the huge, overwhelming focus of their efforts was on Buddhism. And man, did they go deep.
They weren't just skimming the surface, translating a few popular stories here and there. No way. They set out to translate the entire Buddhist canon, the Tripitaka, or the Three Baskets. That means the sutras, which were stories for everyday people, the Vinyas, which are these really dense rule books for monks, and then the Abhidharmas. We're talking seriously complex, high-level Buddhist philosophy. This was a project of absolutely staggering ambition.
Okay, so this next part, I think, is the most incredible piece of the whole story. Because it's not just about what they translated, it's about how they did it. Their whole approach to translation evolved from just, copying words into a truly sophisticated literary art form. So, in the early days, a lot of translations were really literal, word for word, which, sure, it's accurate, but it can feel kind of stiff, dead on the page. But the Uyghur masters, they developed what we now call free translation. They weren't just swapping words. They were basically recreating the work. They were focused on capturing the spirit, the poetry, the deep meaning, all to make it truly beautiful and powerful in their own language. And if this artistic approach had a superstar, it was this guy, Shinko Sheli Tutung. He was a scholar from the city of Beshbalik, and he was a flat-out linguistic genius. He didn't just know a bunch of languages. He really, truly understood literature. To really get a feel for his genius, let's look at a specific example. It's from his most famous translation, the Golden Light Sutra. In the original Chinese version, there's this key moment, and it's described with this super blunt, simple phrase. Okay, so Shingo Shili Tutung sees this phrase, and he gets it. He understands the spiritual meaning behind that simple fact. So what does he do? He transforms an earthquake occurred into this absolutely beautiful, poetic passage. He describes the entire universe reacting to a good deed, with flowers raining down from the sky and the earth trembling, not out of violence, but out of pure joy and reverence. See? He didn't just translate the words. He translated the munder. This whole intellectual tradition, it was so powerful that it actually outlasted the Uyghur Empire itself. As their political power started to fade, their cultural influence just got stronger, and it ended up shaping the next great empire to come along. And this timeline really lays it out. We're talking centuries after their own golden age. And you've got Uyghur scribes, administrators, and translators who are absolutely essential to the Mongol Empire. Guys like An Zhang were trusted advisors in the courts of Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan. Think about that. They brought their writing systems, their skills in running things, and of course, their incredible tradition of translation to help manage one of the biggest empires the world has ever seen. So, this all leaves us with a pretty powerful thought to end on, doesn't it? The story of the Uyghurs is just this incredible reminder that history isn't only about armies and kings. It's also shaped by scholars working away in quiet rooms. When you think about it, behind almost every big idea that's ever traveled around the world, there's the patient, often completely invisible, creative work of a translator, someone who built a bridge so that idea could cross from one world into another.